Automated marriages, household limits, and the frequency of free updates. These are just some of the details the Paralives team is spilling as the game heads into early access in 2025. Now, all these answers come from some recently public dev chats, and I think they reveal both the limitations and carefully designed strategies to balance pleasing demanding fans and also getting this game to launch. We know that lots of games never launch at all, especially indie games, and of course I want the team to do what they think is best. But I do have some opinions and critique too. So first, let's start with updates. Now, as of now, Paralives does plan to do absolutely no paid DLC. So just how often are these updates going to happen and how are they going to work? Alex, of course, answers they're not completely sure yet. Probably could be very frequent updates at first to fix the most important bugs that players will encounter, and then they're going to try their best to have new content updates as often as possible. Some of the bigger new features though could take months to develop, so that's definitely possible that bigger updates will be more spaced out in time. Catching bugs early before, say, they become more systemic issues that layer with other bugs is a very good strategy. You do not want major bugs to pile up, but we certainly have seen that if you play The Sims. But as far as how often new features and content will come, I say their discretion is probably what I would trust most. Definitely, I wouldn't want larger features to be rushed, that would be a disaster. However, I do still have an opinion that disagrees with the team's development. That is, they do not plan to add story progression to early access. This is really hard to get right in terms of balance, and I just think I would like to get some feedback on this. I think it'd be great to get tested during early access. I do understand them not wanting to rush story progression though, whatsoever, but again, I think the larger core systems should be added to early access. Of course, you can have a different opinion than me, that is totally fine. For example, I'm okay with keeping jobs just rabbit holes for early access and adding different jobs that you can actually go in person, active careers, but I still think the major core systems should be during early access. Other than that, I have no qualms whatsoever with their answer, and I think it's very sensible. However, the team of course also has to consider the balance of general performance, and a key example might be how many parafolk can be per household or the lot you visit. Now, I understand people don't really like these limitations, but I do think there is a reason they exist. As Jeremy puts it, we do not have a limit at the moment. Deciding on a limit feels like it would require us to be figuring out a couple things. The performance cost is one aspect of each character in your household. For example, does the game lag if you control 10 paras at once or 20? The balance issues stemming from having a really big number of people in your household. For example, can you create just a 10 para household that will automatically become billionaires in 2 days? Do we even want that? And the user experience we want to offer. Is it easy to pick together cards, traits, manage needs, wants, etc. for tons of characters? When we get there, we'll be able to answer, but at the moment, we're still figuring out a limit. And that makes sense because they don't have the game fully developed yet. Now, I will say I would add a cheat for anyone who does want to push performance as far as it go, but having a reasonable cap otherwise I think is good. Why? Because it is still the base impression you give players of your game. You want a game that generally performs pretty well with the limits that are set, and that's why I would say there should be some sort of cap. But of course, determining that indeed is very challenging. I would say it would be based upon how well the game performs at the recommended specifications. If you have the minimum specs, I would expect the game would not perform quite as well. However, making it perform well at the recommended specs, I think would put their best foot forward. And again, adding a cheat would mitigate people who want to push the limits as much as possible. And speaking of limitations, some limitations will exist for building, at least initially in early access. For example, townhomes should be doable. They've shown that in a previous post. However, sharing a wall might be a bit difficult because it would require extra logic and code, so you can't destroy your house and the neighbors at the same time by destroying the wall. Now, honestly, I think it's cool they're even considering having townhomes in the base game right away. However, it sounds like maybe it's not actually functional, as in it might not be coded to recognize that it's a townhome. So in the future, I would love this, but it's not necessarily a feature I personally would have expected. And of course, when we hear about limitations, I think it's good to understand why they would exist. That is very important when you consider an indie game that's made from scratch without the use of generative AI. And this is illustrated, I think, with their Paramaker items. All the assets in PAM have to be connected to a skeleton of the parafolks to move with it. A fair amount required to have alternative versions, such as hairstyles have free versions depending depending on the hats that pairs are wearing. Pants are divided in different parts depending on the types of shoes. But the past year, they had one of the biggest goals was to add a certain amount of new hairstyles for all hair types, and it was by far the most time-consuming task. Now, I think this is something I've even heard in The Sims, that actually hairstyles are one of the most challenging. And so, in that regard, it's pretty impressive that they have accomplished so much. I've said before, but I think already the Paramaker items are looking pretty great, and we're seeing a little bit of variety. I suspect that will only improve as time goes on, but as they continue to show us even more new items, it's clear they have this in mind, while still balancing out what is feasible for their overall process. And in part, some of the variety, even though they are still mostly staples, is expressed because they are considering different types of clothing, looking at different clothing brand websites. They are also looking for inspiration outside when they are meeting new people or just walking in the street. So of course, they are most influenced by the city which in they reside. In the future though, I do expect we will get more items outside of that. But I know most people watching this video are probably more concerned with live mode gameplay. And one aspect of life simulation games, of course, has to be relationships. And honestly, it's here where I have probably the most critique. This has to do with marriages in early access. They can't confirm with 100% certainty, but it's more likely that pairs will automatically get married when one proposes to the other. Now, there are some key details here. They did say at least for launch, so hopefully that is going to change. Basically, I do want this to change in the future. I don't want my wedding nightmare situation, certainly I don't want it rushed. I do want to be able to host at least free-form weddings, even if they are very basic in nature. In fact, I kind of prefer free-form weddings, quite frankly. I would also like to have a period of time where pairs can simply be engaged, not just get married automatically, or of course, break off engagements too. So yeah, I definitely want to see this change, not necessarily right away, but if possible, before early access ends, or at least close to the game's launch. Even just basic rabbit hole get married or something, just really basic features would be great. I'm just not super into the automatic marriages. Now, alongside this, there were also some discussions about limitations when it comes to having kids and getting pregnant. We'd like to have at least 2 different options, including one that never causes pregnancies in order for players to really control what they want to do. Although, of course, the other will not have a 100% chance to create pregnancy. Now, no issues with this question right here. I think it's a simple way to do it, allows player choice, and it gets the job done. But sometimes fans request for, of course, a little bit more. For example, some people are asking about the possibility of infertility. Infertility gameplay is not planned though. You should be able to choose in the Paramaker whether a character can get pregnant or not at adequate life stages. So being able to make that decision, I think, is great. And honestly, being able to make that decision will make the game a lot more versatile for different types of stories. Again, I personally don't have any issues with this answer. Depicting actual infertility issues brings with it tons of nuance, a host of challenges, and I think that would be really incredibly hard to do. And one last note, even though I do sometimes have criticisms, of course, of their process, at the end of the day, it's their game, and so far it looks like they're making great progress. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, please take care, and I'll see you in the next video.